I was surrounded on every side. For a few moments I went unimpeded. The closest of the mortals stared at me, open-mouthed. Then the more perspicacious, recognizing slowly what I was, started to shout in alarm, then to run, to fall on their faces, to stumble and panic. More turned and fled, shoving their way through the rest to get away. The vast crowd began to fold in on itself, suddenly riven by inexplicable terror at its heart. I paid them no attention. They were like a swarm of insects, huge but incapable of doing me harm. Many were not even properly armed, just carrying machine tools or improvised spears, and their screaming turned swiftly from anger to terror. Some even cried out words of desperate repentance, sobbing frantically and trying to touch my cloak, though the bulk of them merely wished to get away from me as fast as they could. I knew the Angels of Death had an expression for this phenomenon. Transhuman Dread, they called it. If anything, our order possessed a greater power in that regard.
Set in the far future of the 41st millennium, Warhammer 40k is a universe many of us have come to know and love over the past 30 years, and to that, I'm no exception. Hi, I'm Michael, a neuroscience and psychology graduate from Keele University, and today I want to talk to you about Transhuman Dread. Now, while I enjoy the escapism provided by these series as much as the next person, I've always had an interest in how well the science of these worlds marry up with the science of our own. I mean, wouldn't it be cool for some of these sci-fi concepts to actually be real things? Aside from what terrible, horrible place the Warhammer 40k universe is, power on would be cool. Throughout this series, I want to examine the various psychological and neurological phenomena that can be found in the Warhammer 40k universe and determine just how realistic they actually are through the wonderful thing that is our current understanding of science. Today, I thought I'd kick off with one of my favourite phenomena, found in both the Warhammer 40k universe and other sci-fi universes. Transhuman Dread.
Transhuman Dread. Axelmund had heard iterators talk of the condition. He'd heard descriptions of it from regular army officers too. The sight of an Adeptus Astartes was one thing, taller and broader than a man could ever be, armoured like a demigod. The singularity of purpose was self-evident. An Adeptus Astartes was designed to fight and kill anything that didn't annihilate it first. If you saw an Adeptus Astartes, you knew you were in trouble. The appearance alone cowed you with fear. But to see one move, apparently that was the real thing. Nothing human-shaped should be so fast, so lithe, so powerful, especially not anything in excess of 2 meters tall and carrying more armor than 4 normal men could lift. The sight of an Adeptus Astartes was one thing, but the moving fact of one was quite another. The psychologists called it Transhuman Dread. It froze a man, stuck him to the ground, caused his mind to lock up, made him lose control of bladder and bowel. Something huge and warlike gave pause. Something huge and warlike and moving with the speed of a striking snake. That was when you knew that gods moved amongst men, and there existed a scale of strength and speed beyond anything mortal, and that you were about to die. And, if you were really lucky, there might be just enough time to piss yourself first.
Before delving into the science, we first need to define and break down what Transhuman Dread actually is. Much like the rightful rulers of Terra broke down Dawn's pathetic excuse for wars. Don't at me. Seeing as the Warhammer 40k universe not only has a lot of authors that all get to weigh into the lore, but is also designed to sell the addictive substance that is plastic miniatures, the science of this universe is rather lacking. In fact, that extract you just heard is probably the largest and most detailed thing we actually have on Transhuman Dread in this universe. Outside of the scant few references here in books such as No Fear, Watchers of the Throne, and one or two others, it's really hard to find information about this condition. So, bearing that in mind, that's all I'll really be going off with this video, so I'm going to have to make a fair few assumptions. So let's whip out the Codex Assumptio.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action.
For Transhuman Dread, I'll be assuming 1. The fear induced by the condition functions the same way in 40k as it does in real life, thus meaning the condition is subject to our current understanding of fear. 2. Transhuman Dread would be subject to individual differences, meaning that while there will be common symptoms and manifestations of Transhuman Dread, each person will experience it in a different way. 3. That my assumptions from the terms used in the 40k universe are correct. Basically, this third point means that this video is just one understanding of Transhuman Dread, and other people and scientists may see it in different ways. This is essentially how science works, where everyone has different viewpoints until enough evidence supports one. As a side note, in order to both keep this video understandable to non-scientists and under the 1 hour mark, I'm just going to be lightly scratching the surface in a lot of the concepts that I talk about in this video. But if you do want to learn more, make sure to check out the references used in the description and just give it a Google. There's all sorts of information out there on this sorts of stuff, you just need to look. So, after reading through all mentions of transhuman dread that I could find in official GW publications, I think the best way to define transhuman dread would be a psychological condition induced by witnessing transhumans or transhuman feats, deemed impossible by the mind, such as moving with unnatural speed. Symptoms include overwhelming fear, freezing, and loss of control of the bladder and or bowels. Now, while transhuman dread in the 40k universe seems to be pretty unique to humans, this isn't always the case. In fact, there are even accounts of Space Marines, humanity's mightiest warriors, experiencing such a thing upon seeing Primarchs in action.
Guilliman roars a challenge to them. He condemns them to death. He condemns their master to a worse fate. He hurls himself at them. The Primarch is, of course, their greatest asset, Thiel realizes, not because of his physical superiority, though that is hard to overestimate. It is because he is a Primarch, because he is Rebute Guilliman, because he is simply one of the greatest warriors in the Imperium. How many beings could measure favourably against him? Honestly, all 17 of his brothers? Not all 17, nothing like all 17, 4 or 5 at best. At best. The word bearers on the upper structures see him coming. They are kill squad strength at least, the best part of a full company. At least a proportion of them are the vaunted Gal Vorbak elite. But they see him coming and they know what that means. It doesn't matter what cosmic dementia has corrupted their minds and souls. It doesn't matter what eternal promises the dark gods are whispering in their ears. It doesn't matter what inflated courage the warp has poured into their veins along with madness. Guilliman of Ultramar is coming right at them, to kill them all. Even though they stand a chance of hurting him, they waste it, they balk. For a second, their twisted hearts know fear, real fear, and then he has them, and then he is killing them.
Huh, an Ultramarine simping for Rebute. Who would have thought? Now that we have a nice tidy definition of transhuman dread, we know what we need to examine. Now, seeing as it is a sci-fi concept, I wasn't surprised to find that there are no published papers out there about transhuman dread. Therefore, in order to examine this condition, we're going to have to look at the symptoms and see what we currently know about them and how well our current knowledge marries up with that of what's shown in the Warhammer 40k universe. Let's start things off with fear. The dictionary defines fear as an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. While this definition is good, it doesn't exactly have the scientific oomph that we need for this video. Personally, I feel SAR defines fear very well in their 2017 paper titled Fear, Anxiety, and the Amygdala. Fear is an evolutionary conserved survival response triggered by an imminent threat that evokes rapid defensive responses of immobility, attack, or escape, accompanied by hormonal and autonomic changes in preparation for the behavioural response. See? Much better. Rather unsurprisingly, fear is a highly studied area, with roughly 400 papers every year being published in the past decade. And while you may think this many papers has led to a pretty good understanding of what fear is and how it actually works, there's actually still quite a lot we don't know about it. In neuroscience, fear can be broadly divided into 2 different categories. We have conditioned fear and innate fear. Conditioned fear, as suggested by the name, is a type of fear that we have been taught or conditioned to feel in response to specific stimuli. In some cases, we may not even be aware that this conditioning is even occurring. The classic example of conditioned behaviour would be Pavlov's dogs. In this paradigm, Pavlov's conditioned his dogs to associate the ringing of a bell with feeding, and thus, upon just ringing the bell without presenting food, the dogs produce the exact same responses as they would whilst feeding. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the main paradigm that is used to study fear in science is actually known as the Pavlovian fear conditioning. This paradigm is predominantly used in studying fear in animals, specifically rodents. In this paradigm, an initially neutral stimulus, known as the conditioned stimulus, such as a toe, is paired with a noxious unconditioned stimulus, typically a mild foot shock. As a result, the conditioned stimulus acquires the ability to elicit the conditioned responses, such as freezing, when later presented alone. Then we have innate fear, which consists of predisposed behavioural, endocrine, autonomic, and cognitive responses to threatening stimuli. These innate behaviours are presumed to have been developed and maintained through natural selection, due to their ability to promote both survival and reproductive success. While a large amount of our understanding from fear stems from animal models, It should be conserved across species, a sentiment which has been supported by the congruent findings of various studies across both human and animal models. Transhuman Dread likely contains a mixture of both conditioned fear and innate fear. The innate fear in Transhuman Dread would draw on the concepts of predator and prey, in this case the prey being the humans and the predators being the transhumans. Meanwhile, the conditioned fear side of things is likely to be more complex, as it would likely stem from their previous experiences with transhumans. This could range from witnessing them in battle to just simply hearing stories about these mighty beings. Fear is a pretty powerful thing. But where does fear even originate from in the brain? Well, as you might expect from such a complex emotion, there are a variety of pathways and structures all throughout the brain that are involved in this. However, for this video, we care about the area that plays what is considered the largest part in the fear response, and is also known as the fear center of the brain, the amygdala. The amygdala. The amygdala is a key structure involved in the acquisition, expression, and extinction of conditioned fear. Alongside its role in conditioned fear, the amygdala is also believed to play a predominant role in innate fear, as indicated by evidence from animal studies, human lesions, and neuroimaging data. The amygdala itself consists of several interconnected subnuclei, each with their own unique physiological and anatomical features. One such structure involved is the basolateral amygdala, of which the dorsal part, known as the lateral amygdala, is the main input site for sensory information from the sensory cortex and thalamus. The basolateral amygdala also projects to the central nucleus of the amygdala. The central nucleus of the amygdala mediates motor and autonomic responses to fear and stress, targeting nuclei in the midbrain and the hypothalamus. In humans, it has been reported that the bilateral calcification and atrophy of the amygdala impairs the ability to recognize fear in facial expressions. fMRI studies in humans have also indicated the involvement of the amygdala in fear, through showing the viewing of fearful faces activating this region. What happens when we experience fear, and how is the amygdala involved? So, what actually happens when we feel fear? Well, it begins with the triggering of what scientists have dubbed the defense cascade. The defense cascade consists of 7 stages: arousal, freezing, fight, flight, tonic immobility, collapsed immobility, and quiescent immobility. These 7 stages are processed sequentially along a continuum, depending upon factors such as distance of threat and level of danger. These 7 stages can be further broken down into active defense responses, which involve fight and flight, and passive defense responses, which involve arousal, freezing, and the immobilities. Projections from the amygdala into the lateral hypothalamus mediate the autonomic sympathetic response, such as decrease in heart rate, whereas the amygdala projections into the medulla nuclei control parasympathetic effects through efferent vagal fibers that originate from the nucleus accumbens. However, projections from the central nucleus of the amygdala to the periaqueductal grey are responsible for the behavioural aspects of the defence cascade. The periaqueductal grey, located in the midbrain, has been implicated in various homeostatic processes, such as analgesia, pain, and fear. The ventrolateral periaqueductal grey has been implicated in freezing, serving as a brake for threat-related arousal systems and putting the fight-or-flight reaction on hold. This function has been reliably demonstrated in animal models, showing that through the application of either chemical or electrical stimulation, freezing is induced. Alongside freezing, the other stage of the defense cascade that I believe is involved with Transhuman Dread is tonic immobility. Let's kick things off by looking at freezing. Believe it or not, freezing is a behaviour that exists due to the coevolution of predator and prey, and due to the various survival advantages it provides, it has remained ingrained in the brain of species thanks to natural selection. Freezing is defined as a state of attentive immobility, serving to avoid detection by predators and to enhance perception. Alongside a reduction in body sway, another key feature of freezing is a parasympathetically induced reduction in heart rate, known as bradycardia. Freezing is considered a universal fear response, with it being demonstrated in both conditioned and unconditioned fear responses. Interestingly, freezing is also part of a repertoire of species-specific defense responses, with some species showing a high preference for freezing behaviors, meanwhile others hardly ever freezing at all. Freezing has been reliably demonstrated in plenty of studies across a wide array of species. One such species, with brains similar to humans, that freezing has been reliably demonstrated in, is monkeys. In this paradigm, first the monkey is placed alone in a cage. Then, an unfamiliar human enters the room and doesn't make eye contact with the monkey. After a short while, the human then leaves the room. Then they re-enter the room, remaining motionless and staring directly at the monkey. The second condition, where the monkey is being stared at, has been shown to elicit innate fear responses, such as freezing. When it comes to freezing in humans, studies have primarily focused on the induction of fear-induced bradycardia, relying on adversive picture viewing, aka viewing unpleasant pictures, or ones that induce fear, and through the threat of shock. In the threat of shock paradigm, there have been several interesting observations made. One such observation in humans is that freezing is associated with action preparation and is also associated with altered perceptual sensitivity. Neuroimaging studies have suggested that activity in the amygdala periaqueductal grey circuits is associated specifically with freezing and its accompanying parasympathetic autonomic response. Preliminary findings of studies into freezing in humans have indicated that much like animals, humans recruit amygdala, periaqueductal grey, and ventral forebrain structures to control the defense cascade. However, the process of freezing in humans is still relatively unknown, with the majority of studies in this area focusing on bradycardia over the reduction in motion. Finally is tonic freezing. Tonic freezing appears to present as a loss of the ability to move or call out, and is believed to occur when a person is in imminent or actual and great danger. Upon a threshold of sympathetic arousal being reached, but escape or winning the fight is not possible. This can be said to be a somewhat confusing stage, for the physical features remain largely unclear and are often actually contradictory. Some studies have reported increases in heart rate, while others have reported decreases. Tonic immobility, however, can be said to be a somewhat more advanced stage of freezing, with it occurring later in the defense cascade and being characterized by hypertension and unresponsiveness, thus allowing us to differentiate it from freezing. The lack of studies in humans on tonic immobility make it hard to identify whether acute responses and primed or habitual responses of tonic immobility are all mediated by the activation of neuronal circuits involving the extended amygdala, hypothalamus, and periaqueductal grey, or whether they may be activated by an alternative route. However, it has been documented as occurring across numerous accounts, such as shell-shocked soldiers, plane and car crash victims, or physical assault survivors from attacks by wild animals. When experiencing tonic immobility, victims have described subjective experiences of fear, immobility, coldness, numbness, analgesia, uncontrollable shaking, eye closure, and disassociation, as well as a sense of entrapment, inescapability, futility, or hopelessness. Importantly for our case of transhuman dread, animal studies have indicated that defecation occurs during this stage, and appears to reflect parasympathetic activity from the dorsal motor nucleus to the heart, lungs, and defense programs run by the entire nervous system. Conclusions. Now that all that important sciencey stuff is out of the way, let's round out this video by examining the various quotes that you've seen throughout and determining if transhuman dread is a realistic thing. Age of Darkness. As little Horus and his company of heroes charge at the humans, their bodies would enter a state of fear, and the defense cascade would trigger. First would come arousal, as they become aware of the transhumans and their attention affixes to them. Next would be the beginning of the fight or flight response, but this is put on hold by the ventrolateral periaqueductal grey, due to what they are witnessing. This means that they would skip straight to the freezing, where body sway reduces as it prepares for action. Finally, the defense cascade would move to tonic immobility, as the human mind realizes that there is no escape and fight or flight is impossible. At this point, the release of bowels would also likely occur. Here, little Horus and his forces have likely reached the humans, and their deaths certain. However, if they were really lucky, they might have progressed into collapsed immobility, where they would collapse and lose consciousness. Thus, I think it is fair to say that this representation from Age of Darkness checks out, and that this would be how transhuman dread would occur in the real world. Watchers of the Throne. Next up is this extract from the beginning of the video, where you see the custodian walking amongst a group of people. And as you'll notice, transhuman dread manifests itself very differently in this scenario. In my view, this extract is also representative of how transhuman dread would occur in the real world. The reason behind this being, if we once again look back to individual differences. As previously mentioned, researchers noted individual differences in the tonic immobility stage, with accounts reporting fear, immobility, coldness, numbness, analgesia, uncontrollable shaking, eye closure, and disassociation, as well as a sense of entrapment, inescapability, futility, or hopelessness. As such, these accounts explain the range of emotions that we see expressed in this extract, with civilians began to run, fall on their faces, to stumble, and to panic. And some even crying out words of desperate repentance, sobbing frantically, and trying to touch Valerian's cloak. Finally, we have the Ultramarines extract from Know No Fear. Know No Fear. Even though Space Marine, let alone Galvorback biology, this can be vastly different from that of your standard human, this extract still shows evidence of transhuman dread. The slight hesitation that you see in the Galvorback would be fear, as it breaks through all their transhuman conditioning, and would likely function off the same processes as we see in Age of Darkness. Therefore, I think it is fair to say that this extract from Know No Fear once again represents Transhuman Dread in a realistic manner. So, as you might have guessed by now, from all the evidence provided, I feel that not only is Transhuman Dread represented realistically in all the Games Workshop literature, but in reality it could be an actual condition. Therefore, I brand Transhuman Dread as accurate. Thank you so much for watching this video. This was a lot of fun for me to research as a scientist, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Huge shout out to the wonderful voices that you heard throughout this video, of Snipe and Wib and Dr. Simon Clark. It was great to be able to have some prominent members of the community participate in this project. If you have any questions about anything that I spoke about in this video, or suggestions for future videos, make sure to drop it in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping it a like, and maybe even subscribing and sharing with your friends, as it really does help with the mystical, magical YouTube algorithm. Make sure to check back next time when I'll be examining if it really is possible to know no fear. And until then, I hope you all have a wonderful day.